Good afternoon. Hello, I'm Roy Blatchford, and I am the editor of the A to Z series. And I'm with Andy Hunter this afternoon. Just say hello, Andy.
Hi, Roy. Nice to be here this afternoon.
And where are you and who are you?
So I'm speaking from Huntingdon, where I'm sat in my office at Hinchinbrook School, where I'm the principal.
Lovely to see you again. And having worked with you, obviously, Andy, on the series and on the writing of the book, really good to have you here this afternoon. I'm just going to say a few words about the series, the A to Z series. It's been put together over the past few years now. We've got 15 titles. They range across topics from primary and secondary leadership to primary maths, to primary English, disadvantage, inclusion and diversity, and fair sprinkling of titles with an international bias. So something for everyone. And we're doing a series of podcasts where I talk to the authors about why they wrote and to dip into the book to give you a sense of why you might like to buy it. So I'm going to kick off, if I may, Andy, by reading from the foreword of the A to Z of secondary leadership, of which you're the author. And I wrote by way of entree to your book, leaders in education never cease to amaze me. The best teachers and the best leaders, they're incorrigibly optimistic. They share compelling stories with staff, and just as great teachers give that well rehearsed September speech to students about their potential, leaders are restless for excellence and realistic about delivery. And I asked the question, how are they defining excellence? And in my view, and I know from working with you and your leadership of a number of schools, leaders are clear that their organisation should be an employer of first choice, with working conditions and professional development opportunities the best they can be within financial and operational limits. Head teachers are ambitious that their school should be a first choice for families. And I go on about leaders are united in their ambition to create great environments for learning. So without further ado, Andy, I'm going to pass over to you and ask you why you actually came to write the book and give us a flavour, perhaps, of sort of the general approach of the book before we perhaps dip into a couple of the A to Z chapters.
Okay, well, so it's interesting that you picked out that particular piece from the introduction, Roy, because I absolutely agree that leaders should be relentlessly optimistic. And in the in the time shortly before I wrote the book, I dealt with something at work that was so awful that you wouldn't wish it on any school leader to deal with. And it knocked my optimism a bit. And it really made me think, well, do I want to continue doing this job that until then I'd absolutely adored? And if I do, how am I going to get my optimism back and my enthusiasm for the role? So really, writing this book was a process of just remembering all the things that maybe I'd forgotten I knew about school leadership, and just gathering together all my thoughts in one place. And to be absolutely frank, if I'd have finished writing it and put it in a desk drawer and it had never seen the light of day, it would have served its purpose fantastically. The fact that it was published um, in your series was the icing on the cake for me. In terms of what it's, the process of writing it was fantastic. Every evening in the car on the way home, I'd be sort of pondering what I could write. I sort of choose a letter of the alphabet and think, well, maybe I could write this. And more often than not, I ended up moving things around and having to rethink the chapter titles because I had something new that was going to be a better B or a better F. But it was a really interesting few months of reflecting on my own leadership, reflecting on my values and beliefs, and really trying to express it all in a kind of a disciplined format, which isn't always my deal. I'm a little bit more, take the top off my head and pour everything out onto the table by choice. So it was a really interesting exercise for me.
Well, thanks, Andy. And I know from working with you on editing it, how, if I may say to anybody who would be interested in buying it, you have a natural style which is kind of folksy, but actually really accessible. And you can kind of you distill into 1,500 words in every chapter, really some interesting thoughts and reflections on wide experience and it's that kind of reflection and advice and guidance. And I think that's, what your book does. It kind of embodies what the series does. Could we perhaps just dip into a couple of chapters that you and I have actually said beforehand we might like to, and you quite particularly enjoyed writing? We're going to go to K. We arrive, for those who are interested, we begin with arriving and being and communicating. But when we get to K, Andy chose keeping as the title. Why, Andy?
Because keeping hold of our staff, recruiting and retaining the best staff is one of the most difficult jobs facing head teachers at the minute. It's super hard and super important. And if you can't do that, if you can't keep those staff, and because the school is in a tricky position, things are only going to get trickier. So it's really important to keep those staff. And what I liked about writing this chapter is, for a lot of chapters, I didn't surprise myself when I was writing. I kind of knew what I was going to write, and I wrote it. But for this chapter, I kind of reached a level of understanding and clarity about what I thought that I hadn't previously had. So it was a very rewarding chapter to write. And what I talk about here is that to build intrinsic motivation, the idea that people do a good job because they want to do a good job, which is when we do our best work, when we really want to do it. We've got to have three things in place. We've got to have clarity of vision, so people understand what the journey is and they can choose to be on it. We've got to have the right culture and climate, and by that I mean if we think of the culture as being the personality of the school and the climate as being the mood of the school, they've got to be right. And we've got to have competence in the senior team and in the wider leadership team, so that people believe that the things we say we're going to do, we can actually do. And I think if you have all those three things, you've got a really fertile soil in which to grow that intrinsic motivation, where work becomes its own reward. And what I enjoyed about writing this chapter was thinking about, well, what if you don't have any of those things? What if you've got, clarity of vision and you've got competence, but your culture and climate is so poor that when people make a mistake, they'll haul over the coals and they just learn never to stick their heads above the parapet? What would that look like? And I think that will probably look like somewhere where people will work, but they're just going to keep their heads down. They're not going to take risks. They're not going to be adventurous. They'll do essentially what they have to do, and they'll go home at the end of the day and thank God they are doing. And that's no good, is it? And similarly, if you've got the clarity of vision and you've got the culture and climate right, but you're incompetent, then people will just be frustrated because things aren't going to go right, are they? They'll put in all the work and they'll listen to all the training and they'll get all the speeches about vision, but they'll just watch thing after thing after thing stumble and fail. And if the third kind of way of spinning it would be, if you've got the culture and climate right and you've got the competence right, but you've got no vision, then people are just kind of, what are we doing it for? We're just treading water. We're working hard, but we're not moving forwards, and we're not gaining the satisfaction that we gain from really seeing a job have an impact. So I was pleased with that, because when I read books, I always turn to the diagrams first. And I was delighted to be able to put together a little diagram myself, which I think is genuinely helpful.
Andy, thank you so much, because I was just looking at actually page 74, the little diagram you've described and unpicked. Yeah. And the diagram there is just really a great synthesis of what it is to be in a great school with vision, with culture and competence, and, as you said, the opposites. I'd like also just to draw listeners' attention to, viewers' attention to, at the end of each of the A to Z chapters, we have a thing called an aside, which is a bit of fun. And in the one that Andy's done here, he's done an aside on it's the little things that count: Cake Thursday, postcards of praise, shout-outs wall, anonymous thank you mug, and rounds of applause in staff briefings. And I think probably that captures the essence of any school that you're leading, yes?
Yeah, now I've got a story about that, Roy. I was in the Year 13 Leavers Assembly the other day, and I don't go to Year 13 assemblies that often. And the head of year put up the names of every child in Year 13 who will turn 18 between now and the end of the school year, start next September, to wish them all happy birthday. And she said, I wish you all a happy birthday, December, because Mr. Hunter wishes us happy birthday in staff briefings. And of course, I know I did that, but I didn't know that me wishing people, it's very easy to find staff's birthdays and say happy birthday to these people this week. I hadn't realised that had inspired a kind of a copycat movement in Year 13 assembly. So I was delighted with that.
Thank you. Yes, because the time of year of assemblies, isn't it? And farewells. The other
Yeah.
chapter I thought we just might dip into because I know it's something sort of close to your heart. You've got a super chapter, vulnerability. And I whether just for 2 or 3 minutes you might dip into that for us, please.
Yeah. So the thrust of that chapter is, I think, that good leaders are better leaders if they have the bravery to be vulnerable. And I draw a distinction between vulnerability and weakness, because I think weakness is where we hear criticism and we crumble, and vulnerability is where we have the strength to hear weakness and take it on board and work with it. And then it becomes a massive strength. And what I say in that chapter is that we have to think of our vulnerability as being almost like a precious stone in the setting, and it's held in that setting with our competence, our confidence, our reflection, and our knowledge. And if we can demonstrate to people that it's okay to say, I don't know the answer, as long as people know that we generally know the answer, because we've established our competence. And it's okay to say with confidence, what, I think you might be right, I might be wrong. Then that empowers us. And if we use that is a process of reflection to become better at what we do, and if it's clear to people that we understand how things work, so our vulnerability isn't just haplessness, then that vulnerability makes our leadership permeable in a way. It means that ideas can flow both in and out of our leadership in a two-way discourse, which puts us in a much, much stronger position to be able to lead effectively than those weak leaders who I think often through a lack of confidence don't want to hear any dissenting voices and sort of think, well, my seniority means that I must be right and I'm the only person who's allowed to have ideas around here and it's going to be my way or it's not going to happen. That kind of impermeable leadership. If you're lucky and everything you do is right, well, great, but it almost certainly won't be. And if that's the case, then you're in a tight spot.
Thank you for that wisdom. And I like the way you end that chapter about vulnerability is valuable. It reveals to others our human side. And the final sentence, which is then picked up in the rather clever aside, is like oysters, vulnerable leaders take the grit of challenge and turn it into pearls. And I really like the way that chapter ends. Andy, just enjoying our brief chat to a close. The A to Z series has all of the books have a section A, which is the A to Z, and they then have a section B, which is a kind of collection of resources. And in your cases, some really a good recommended reading list. You do something around well-being, including Happy February, and you end the book on 24 questions for reflective school leaders. And those 24 are in fact divided into 8 reflective questions, 8 evaluative questions, and 8 developmental questions. And I wonder whether you might just to take one or two just to close our discussion.
Yeah, okay. So when I talk to people about the book, I would always say that you're unlikely to learn anything terribly new here, but there'll be things in it that you think, oh, I'd forgotten that. And actually, it works for me because there are things in it that I've forgotten, and I wrote the thing. So if it's working for me, it must work for others. And a question that I think is really important to come back to is in those reflective questions where I say, what have I learned about the school recently? What new questions do I need to ask? And whose voice do I need to hear? And I think we should be asking ourselves that question really regularly because it's so easy to get into the habit of just hearing the same voices again and again. And if we do that, we miss all sorts of really, really crucial information. I think another question we should be reminding ourselves is who in my school is most likely to be overlooked for professional development? Why and what can I do to address that? And that again is in a similar vein really about opening out our view of the school, so that we're really seeing into the cracks and the corners, and getting a much better idea of it. Because the premise that snow melts from the edges tells us that if there's something bad about to happen, it's probably not the people in the middle who know about it. And we owe it to ourselves to know what's going on all over the place.
Thank you for your words of wisdom. You've given us a real flavour of the book. I'm just going to end by reminding everybody that the A to Z of secondary leadership is a celebration. And I remember we talked about this when we put the book together. And on the back cover, we've got it's a celebration of the art and science of leading secondary schools, organised around the 26 letters of the English alphabet. And if I could close, Andy, and you might just offer a final word on this. On the back cover, you wrote, "School leadership is the best job in the world, despite being frustrating, exhausting, and at times utterly bamboozling. From time to time, we look up from our work and realise how very privileged we are to work in such a rewarding, valuable role." Your final reflections on that?
Well, I couldn't put it better myself, Roy. Uh, it is the best job in the world. I adore it, and I genuinely enjoy coming to work every day. It's such a special job, and I'm really pleased, Roy, that I had an opportunity when I was feeling a little bit knocked out from it, to revitalise myself through writing the book, and it did the trick. It got me right back where I need to be.
That's really demonstrating vulnerability and keeping. Thanks very much, Andy. And to those who've been listening, watching, we hope you might be interested in following it up. There's Andy's book on leadership in the secondary sector, and there's an A to Z of wider titles. Thanks for listening, everybody.